these are some of the latest pictures from Gaza.
The conflict between Israel and Palestine is the talk of the world right now. The enmity between these two countries is not something that popped out in recent days. Their conflict started way back in 1917. As some popular believes, their enmity was not caused by any religious reasons, but for land and recognition. To understand their conflict we need to travel way back to the period when the Israel and Palestine region was part of an empire called the Ottoman, between the 14th and early 20th century. At the time the Palestine region consisted mostly of Muslims, a small percentage of Christians, and an even small percentage of Jews. You see, back in 931 BC, after the death of King Solomon, the united monarchy was split into the Kingdom of Israel and Kingdom of Judah. But due to a lot of conquerings and prosecutions, most of the Jews had to leave their homeland and settle in different parts of the world, mostly in Europe. In 1897, a man called Theodor Herzl came forward and founded the Zionist Movement. The agenda of the movement was to unite the Jews, and to bring them back to their homelands in Israel, and create an independent nation for the Jews. During the First World War, the British wanted to defeat the Ottoman Empire, and to do that they needed the help of the Jews and the Arabs. For that, they proposed to Jews the Balfour Declaration, a public statement announcing support for the establishment of a national home for the Jewish people in Palestine. At the same time they proposed to the Arabs that, if they help them to defeat Ottoman, they will give Arabs full control over Palestine. The British also meets with the French and proposes to them, after they win, they will give part of the entire Arabian Peninsula to French. After the end of the First World War, the British converted this region into their colony, and as part of their divide and rule policy separated the Muslims, Christians and Jews by separate administrative policies. And they honored their agreement with the Jews to some extent, by allowing the Jews to immigrate to the Israel-Palestine region. But the Palestine population was not happy to see this, and started to revolt. But British subdued the revolts with the help of the Jewish population. This marks the beginning of the enmity between the Jews and the Palestine population. After this, the British issued a white paper, restricting the immigration of Jews to a certain number. And also announced that, in 10 years they will establish a joint Arab-Jew nation there. But this proposal was not taken well by both the Jews and the Palestine population. At this time, this guy happened, and the Jews in Europe had to flee from there to escape the Holocaust. And the only place they could go to was Israel. And the enmity between both sides grew even larger. After the end of Second World War, the British was not in a position to hold all their colonies, especially the problematic ones. Among those colonies was the Palestine-Israel region. They handed the region over to the UN. To establish peace, the UN proposed to divide the entire region in two equal parts. One an Arab or Palestine nation and one a Jewish nation. And established Jerusalem as an international region, as Jerusalem is the holy city for the three religions, Christians, Muslims and Jews. Jews agreed to this proposal. But other Arab nations did not like this new Jewish nation, and all these Arab nations came together to form the Arab League, and declared war against Israel. Thus, beginning the famous Arab-Israel War during 1948 to 1949. Israel defeats the Arab League, and occupies even more land, including the land of Jerusalem. In 1967 a second war was started, which later came to be known as the 6 Days War. This war was also won by Israel, and they took control over the entire Palestine and even lands which were under the control of Egypt. Later, with UN's interference, the land they conquered were given back. With this a peace treaty between the Arabs and Israel took place, thus ending the Arab-Israel War. During this period the Palestine population began to grow weary, and their demand for an independent nation started taking roots more strongly. In time they agreed to settle for the land previously proposed by the UN. But before handing it over, Israel established settlements across the lands designated for Palestine. This enabled Jews to go and settle down in these establishments, for reasons such as religious, political, or because the housing was cheap. And as a means to protect these Jews, Israel soldiers were also went there. This extreme movement by the Israel was not taken lightly by the Palestine population. And as a result of their rage came forth the Intifada movement, meaning uprising. It began mostly as protests and boycotts, but soon became violent. Israel responded with heavy force, resulting in the death of hundreds of Jews and thousands of Palestinians. At this time an extreme militant group called Hamas was formed in the region of Gaza. All these worsened the conflict between Israel and Palestine. As a means to end this fighting, the leaders of both countries signed the Oslo Accords, which states that the both countries should go back to the ways suggested by the UN, and also gives a certain amount of freedom of administration to Palestine. But Oslo Accords were rejected by the extreme organizations in both the countries, and the fighting continues till date. The recent conflict between these two nations is associated with the Al-Aqsa Mosque in Jerusalem, the third most sacred and holy place for Muslims. Israel's plan to build a synagogue in Jerusalem stirred up minor attacks and protests around Jerusalem. As the time for Ramadan neared, more and more people started pouring into Al-Aqsa to pray. At this time Israel passed a law regarding restrictions and regulations for those who visit Al-Aqsa, limiting the number of visitors to around 10,000 per day. According to some sources, it is due to the coronavirus outbreak. But this resulted in heavy retaliations from the Palestine population. And extremist organizations like Hamas started to attack Israeli soldiers. The Israeli army retaliated and even went inside the Al-Aqsa Mosque to capture the extremists. This action by Israel infuriated the Palestine people, as Al-Aqsa was one of their most sacred places. And the extremist groups started firing rockets and missiles, and Israel responded with their own firepower. As said earlier, their fighting is not something just happened recently, it is a century-old conflict. Let's just pray for the common people who are caught in between this war, and let's hope this conflict ends soon and they find a way to live together peacefully. Thank you for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe.